Welcome to our homestead, everyone. Over the years, so many people have asked me why. Why did we leave the city life for the country life and move out to a homestead in the middle of nowhere? And today we're finally going to answer that question for you and tell you exactly why we did it all. Let's get going. So I will be as brief and as succinct as I possibly can because I can talk for a very long time about this topic and give my personal testimony to you, but I won't. So there's two really important reasons that we left the city. The first one is our family in general, and we will talk about that first. The second one is our study in the Bible. So we'll start with me first. I grew up in Michigan, in the suburbs of Detroit, and then my father moved us out to the countryside, just outside those outer ring suburbs in Detroit, and we lived on 2.5 acres, kind of like on a small homestead in that area. So I got used to raising chickens, doing things in the garden, tending to an orchard, chopping firewood, all that kind of stuff. I was exposed to it when I was a kid. My wife comes from the Philippines and she lived in the city for most of her life. So I will jump ahead to just after grad school. I went to grad school at a small university in Michigan and then moved to Washington, D.C. I lived in the district without a car for 6.5 years. My wife and I met online and she moved to the United States about 4 years into my time in DC. And this week we will celebrate our 14th wedding anniversary. But I digress. After we lived in DC for a little while, I kept losing my job as an architect. Boom, we moved to Houston, Texas, and it was really good to us. I think I mentioned that before. Houston was great. It's a huge city though. It took us hours to get to work. We had our daughter when we lived in Houston, our first daughter. Almost instantly, we put her in daycare and continued our careers. Like I said before, I'm an architect, my wife's a nurse, but she worked in IT, in nursing, and she was moving up the corporate ladder at the biggest hospital system in Texas, I think it is, Memorial Hermann. And I was talking future partnership with the firm that I was with. Fast forward 2 years, and we barely saw our daughter every single day. Now, I know a lot of people go through that every day of their life, and we saw our daughter for 2 hours a day, right? Beside the half an hour it took to wake her up and get her to daycare in the morning. Then it was race home, make some dinner, spend a tiny bit of time together, boom, in bed for the next day. Now when that happens, you do one of two things. You either, as my friend says, suck it up, buttercup, and just deal with it, and that's the way it is, and that's the way it's going to be, or you change your situation. Either one of those is fine, but for us, it was important to change our situation. So that means moving, changing jobs, changing careers, whatever it may be, so that you can spend more time with your family. We started a few online businesses, and we were excited to start to grow those. But then at the very same time, we started studying something in the Word of God that led us to making the huge change that we did. I thought you would enjoy the chickens behind me for this next part. So we started studying the Bible with some friends of ours. We always did, but this topic came up where we were saying to ourselves, hey, let's look at these prophets and what they're doing. Like Elijah and like John the Baptist and even Moses, and look to see where they were living and why. And the Bible does direct you to the reasons why they were living out in the countryside. So John the Baptist lived a very humble, simple life, it says, out in the wilderness, away from everybody else, and people came to him to hear him preach, right? Elijah lived outside and away from the city where Ahab was. He traveled into the city to warn the people, but he came back out again. And then God took him even deeper into the wilderness to hide him when Ahab was looking for him. Remember, friends, these aren't just stories in the Bible. They were written for us for today, for examples. Let's look at Moses. Moses lived in Egypt. He was essentially an Egyptian. He learned the Egyptian religion. He learned the Egyptian culture. He ate Egyptian food, except for he abstained from some unclean foods that his actual mother steered him away from. She was teaching him the entire time. When he got kicked out of Egypt, when he fled, he lived in the wilderness for 40 years. He tended to sheep for 40 years. The first 40 years was spent in Egypt. The second 40 years was spent outside of Egypt and away from those influences. Now, Egypt can be used, just like Babylon, as a symbol of sinful life, right? So if you get away from that sinful life or that sinful place, it takes a while still to get that sinfulness out of you. So it took 40 more years before God decided he could use him and sent him back into Egypt to tell Pharaoh to let his people go. And these are really quick examples of just a few, but if you read through the entirety of the Bible, you will find more and more of the same types of stories. And they are there for a very specific reason. And then, yes, even Jesus himself, when he was in his ministry after he was 30, he did not stay in the city. He always retired outside of the city, and whenever he could, he always spoke to large crowds outside of the city. He didn't fill a coliseum full of people and speak to them from, the stage. He was always out in the countryside, and that is an important lesson. He always rested out in a garden, out away from the city, and he didn't spend much time there at all, unless it was in the temple where he was preaching, and then he would leave again. So why is this? It's because sin is concentrated in the city. Now, sin reigns everywhere on our earth because we're a fallen world, right? So that sin, though, is highly concentrated where there's a high concentration of people. Let's look at Cain, who established the first city, the Bible tells us. Adam and Eve and Seth, at this point, were out in the countryside and tilling and working the land. And Cain established the first city. Let's look at Lot. Lot did not want to listen to God, and he established himself in that city, in Sodom. And what happened? He almost lost his entire family. If not for those two angels that were sent to him to get him out and get his family out and basically drag them out of that city, they would have been lost as well. And his wife was, because her heart was back in the city and the things of the city and the idolization of the things in the city. And she turned around. What happened to her? Pillar of salt. There are more distractions in the city. There are more things to do in the city that do not pertain to God. In entertainment of whatever you want to do. And things, recreation is not bad, but you need to be working with your hands and working the soil. And God has done this for a reason. He's done this for our benefit, because if you've removed yourself from that situation and you are providing for yourself, obviously with his help, but I'm going to use that phrase, providing for yourself out in the countryside and tilling the land and growing your own food and raising your own whatever, then you are a little more insulated, probably a lot more insulated, if times get bad, and they will, than somebody in the city. Now, I've always had a preparedness mindset, but at one point it was about fortifying my suburban house, buying a whole bunch of, freeze-dried food and stashing it, and arming myself and all of that stuff. And I realized how futile that is. Now, I don't fault anybody if you're still doing that, and that's cool. I have a ton of prepper friends, and they're still in the city. Love them dearly, but I'm begging them to get out, because defending a suburban townhouse or a suburban house from angry, hungry mobs is almost an impossible task. And if you don't think that, we can have a discussion down in the comment section below. But let me get back. So in the midst of this Bible study and the feeling that we never saw our daughter, and we were just so busy all the time sitting in traffic for an hour and a half each way to work, something had to change. And that led us to quit our jobs. But we had already felt the need to start paying off our debt and getting rid of that debt. And that's what really freed us up. So if you're thinking about doing this, I want to encourage you that is the absolute first step you need to do. If you can move out right now, great. But if you need to pay off debt, Focus on that and do it. Get away from every tiny little extra thing that you buy that you don't need, and just focus on getting rid of the debt, because that is a chain around your neck and that will hold you back. Once we got rid of most of the debt, but not all of it, we decided it was time to leave those jobs. My wife did find one pretty easily because she's a nurse, and I decided to build the homestead and spend my time doing that, not practice architecture, take care of our daughter, and build this place. Now, I do want to mention also that within my particular Protestant denomination, our church founders, and particularly one of them, her name was Ellen White, she wrote a lot about moving out of the cities for a country homestead lifestyle. And that permeated the writings that she actually did for the church, and they made a compilation book in the 1950s called Country Living. And that is just a really brief summary of what I can tell you about how we were moved to do this. Obviously, it was also the Holy Spirit working on our hearts to say, hey, you don't need the money from your jobs. God will take care of you, we'll take care of you, and everything will be okay financially. So friends, we stepped out on faith. We obeyed God. That still small voice within us, we listened to it, and we went forward. So I want to encourage you to please, if it's on your heart to do it, move forward. Listen to that still small voice and take that first step. Okay, friends, that is our story in a nutshell. I could go on for an hour with my testimony, like I said, and maybe I will do that sometime for you, because I've been a lot of different places, and I came from a dark place and then it's been insane. But if you want to hear that, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll do that soon. All right, have a beautiful, blessed day, and we will see you on the next video.